My father accepted that his new wife would ban me from the house where I grew up. I stopped calling him on his birthday. Last year she left him and he wrote me as if 8 years hadn't passed. My father sent me a WhatsApp last month, a Thursday at 9 in the morning, as if 8 years hadn't passed. It said, "Sebastián, how are you? I'd love to see you." I didn't answer. I replied 10 days later, after 3 more messages, with a single line. After that he stopped writing me. Today he lives alone in the house where I grew up. I live 15 minutes away, in Juriquilla. I haven't set foot in that house in 9 years. If this is your kind of story, subscribe and drop a like. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and it keeps the Reddit dopamine coming. Okay, back to the story. Let me back up. My name is Sebastián. I'm 27. I'm a civil engineer. I have a small structural consulting office in the Alamos neighborhood of Querétaro. I review foundations and structures for mid-size construction firms, and I live alone with my dog Polka in an apartment in Juriquilla. I graduated from UAQ at 22, worked 4 years as a site engineer at Grupo Sadasi, and at 26 I opened my own practice with a loan from a development lender. I've paid off half of it in a year. My father is named Jamie. He's 62. He owned an auto parts distributor until he sold it 3 years ago. Today he's retired and, according to Uncle Pablo, he's depressed. He lives alone in the Jurica house where I grew up until I was 18. My mother was named Leticia. She died of breast cancer when I was 14. It took 8 months from the diagnosis to the funeral. The funeral was at Panteon Jardin. My father cried the day of the wake. I didn't see him cry again, not once. My uncle Pablo is 59. He's my mom's younger brother. He's an accountant. He never married. He lives in a house in Jurica 6 blocks from the house where I grew up. From the time I was 15, Uncle Pablo was the person who looked after me bit by bit. From 18 on, he's been it. My father married Patricia 8 months after the funeral. I was 14 years and 9 months old when I met her. The first time Patricia came to the house, I was doing homework at the dining table. She arrived with a tray of cookies. She said, "You must be Sebastián. What a big boy." She gave me a cookie. The cookies were good. I finished them alone that night because my father didn't want any more. 2 weeks later my father told me Patricia was moving in with us. I asked him if she was my stepmother. He said, "She's my wife. And she's your family now." Patricia moved in with her 2 kids, Andrea, 17, and Julian, 12. Andrea took the room that had been my mom's sewing room. Julian took the guest room. My room stayed my room for exactly 3 weeks. At 3 weeks Patricia told me, "Sebastián, we're going to need your room for a study. Andrea's in high school, she needs to concentrate. You're going to sleep in the small study next to the kitchen. You'll see it's comfortable." My father was in the living room when Patricia said this. He didn't say anything. I looked at him. He looked at the newspaper. I went to the small study, took my clothes out of the boxes, and hung them in the glass closet. The small study fit a pull-out couch, a small desk, and nothing else. My clothes lived in that glass closet for 3.5 years. I'm going to tell a dozen things about Patricia because otherwise it doesn't make sense. At 15, Patricia reorganized the albums in the living room. The albums of my mom with me and with my father went into a box and the box went to the basement. In their place she put photos of her with her kids and with my father. I asked where the albums were. She said, "I kept them. So they don't get ruined. If you want to look at them, let me know." I never asked. At 16 I went down to the basement one night, pulled out the box, and carried 4 albums 6 blocks over to Uncle Pablo's house. They never came back to that house. At 15.5, Patricia started telling her friends, when they came over for coffee, "This is Sebastián, Jamie's son from his first marriage. Never, my son. Never, our son. Always, from the first marriage." Like it was a technical detail. At 16 Patricia told me there wasn't going to be money for the gym anymore. I'd been going to the gym since 14 on the recommendation of my mother's oncologist. He'd said exercise would help me with the grief. My father said, "Your stepmother's right. We're tight." 6 months later they enrolled Andrea in dance classes that cost twice as much. At 16.5, on my birthday, Patricia made a cake but didn't sing. She said, "Sebastián, birthday. Cut." I cut. I ate in the kitchen alone. Her, my father, and her kids ate in the dining room talking about the concert Andrea and Julian were going to that Saturday. At 17 Patricia threw my box of comics in the trash. She said it didn't fit in the glass closet. I told her it did fit. She said, Sebastián, this is my house too. And I say it doesn't fit. My father was in the living room. He told Patricia, love, the kid's right, it does fit. Patricia told him, Jamie, choose. My father went quiet and went back to his newspaper. The box went to the trash that night. At 17 and a half it was Patricia's cousin's wedding. All 5 of us went. Patricia sat me at the table of 7 and 8-year-olds. I told my father I wanted to leave. He said, tough it out, don't be like that. I toughed it out. I guessed the kids' ages for 3 hours so I wouldn't have to think. At 18 I left. I turned 18 on August 9th. I packed my clothes, my books, a box of pencils, 2 posters, and the photograph of my mom I'd rescued from the basement. Everything fit in Uncle Pablo's car. My father was in the garage when we loaded. He said, good luck. He shook my hand. Like I was a stranger. I didn't cry. Uncle Pablo drove the 6 blocks to his house in silence. He said, kid, the upstairs room is yours. It's yours until you decide otherwise. I've been on that block for 9 years. First with Uncle Pablo. At 22 in a rented studio 3 blocks down. At 26 in Juriquilla, 15 minutes away. I started at UAQ in January. The semester cost 1,800 pesos at the public university. I worked weekends hauling material at a hardware store downtown and helped Uncle Pablo with the invoices at his office. My parents sent an envelope of money that first December with a Christmas card signed by all 5 of them. I mailed it back. I didn't send a note. My father called me 3 times in 8 years. At 19 he asked me to come to the family Christmas party. I told him I had an exam. I didn't have an exam. At 23 he told me my paternal grandmother had died and asked me to come to the funeral. I told him I wasn't going. I went to the cemetery alone 3 days later to leave flowers for my grandmother. I didn't go in the house. At 25 he called me to say he'd sold the distributor. I didn't answer. Patricia didn't call me once. Neither did Andrea or Julian. Patricia had 2 grandkids in those 8 years. I found out on Facebook. I graduated at 22 with a 9.2 average. Uncle Pablo and 2 friends from school came to the ceremony. My father didn't. I didn't invite him. At 23 I joined Grupo Sadasi as a site engineer on a development in Juriquilla. 3 years there. I learned deep foundations, concrete structures, and how to fight a contract with a client that doesn't want to pay. At 26 I took out the loan and opened my office. Within a year I had 4 construction firms as recurring clients. Polka arrived at 25. I picked her up from a shelter in Corregidora. She's a mutt, 1 ear up and 1 down. She sleeps on the couch in my living room. My mom has been gone for 19 years. Last year Patricia left my father. I found out through Uncle Pablo. My uncle has a client who's a friend of Patricia's. The client told my uncle that Patricia had gone off with another man, an accountant from my father's golf club, and had taken half of everything. The house, the car, the bank account. My father kept the other half of the house legally, but Patricia wanted to sell and split. My father didn't want to sell. They were in litigation. Uncle Pablo told me this one night at dinner, without drama. He said, Sebastián, just so you know. Don't dwell. I said, thanks, uncle. 2 weeks later the first message arrived. The first message said, Sebastián, how are you? I'd love to see you. 8 hours later, the second, I know a lot of time has passed but let's think about what we have as father and son. I love you. I didn't answer either. 4 days later, the third, Sebastián, please. I'm alone. I need you. I read it walking out of a site meeting. I took 6 days to reply. During those 6 days I thought about it again, thought about it one more time. I talked to Uncle Pablo one night. My uncle didn't tell me what to do. He said, kid, you know. Whatever you do, I've got you. On day 7 I replied with 1 line. You didn't write me on 8 birthdays, Dad. You wrote me the day you were left alone. I blocked his number after sending the message. 2 months later a formal email arrived at my work address. He'd taken it from my website. It said he was in therapy, that he'd come to understand he'd failed me during my adolescence, that he was asking me for the chance to rebuild, even if slowly, and that he'd like to see me someday, even for a coffee. I didn't answer it the first day. 3 days later I wrote a draft. I read it. I deleted it. I wrote another. I read it. I deleted it. In the end I sent him 5 lines. Dad, when I was 16 I asked you to defend my comics. When I was 17 I asked you to seat me at your table. When I was 18 I asked you to hug me before I left. You didn't do it once. It took you 8 years without Patricia to remember you have a son. It took me 3 to stop thinking about you. Now it's 9. Good luck with the house. I sent it. I blocked the email. 4 months have passed since that last message. He hasn't written me again. My father lives alone in the house where I grew up. He's trying to buy Patricia's half but doesn't have the liquidity. Uncle Pablo says if he doesn't buy it before October, the house goes to auction. Patricia already has an apartment in a new development in Juriquilla, ironically 4 blocks from mine. I saw her once at the Costco on Bernardo Quintana with her new boyfriend. She was pushing a cart. She saw me. She dropped her face. She kept walking. Andrea got married last year and had a kid. She didn't invite me to the wedding. Julian is 31 and still lives in the upstairs room of the Jurica house. He works at a call center. Apparently he doesn't speak to Patricia either. Uncle Pablo just turned 60. I threw him a cookout in my patio with 6 of his friends. He raised a glass and said, to my sister Leticia, who sent us Sebastián so I'd have someone to take care of. The rest of us went quiet. I stood up, hugged him, and we kept eating. Polka is 3. She's sitting at my feet right now while I write this. The Jurica house where I grew up is going to be sold between October and December. Uncle Pablo asked me if I wanted to try to buy it. I told him no. He said, what if my sister would have wanted to leave it to you? I said, my mom already left me what she had to leave me. She left me you. The house is going to be sold, it's going to be split between Patricia and my father, and the money is going to go. I'm not going to walk in. I'm not going to call. I'm not going to cry when my father moves to the small apartment he's going to have to move to, because they pushed me out of that house bit by bit when I was 14, and whoever leaves when they're pushed out doesn't come back.